Central Business Districts. Three words that have either induced a yawn among normal people or a hard on among the finance bros. They are a natural part of most urban developments, where a bunch of office spaces and white collar workplaces clump together and form the money making backbone of service based economies. Some iconic CBDs across the world include Midtown Manhattan in New York, Canary Wharf and the City of London, both within London, La Défense just outside of Paris, Shinjuku in Tokyo, and practically the entirety of both Singapore and Hong Kong at this point. The Philippines, with its massive offshore professional services industry, has established a bunch of business districts across the country, even outside of its capital. However, the most prominent ones are still at the heart of Metro Manila, with the biggest ones being the Makati CBD and Bonifacio Global City. And oh boy, do Filipinos have opinions on the both of them. As where many nation-dividing conflicts begin, one of the few times I've encountered the Makati versus BGC debate was on Reddit. Both sides make a lot of points regarding the merits of their respective preferred district, but from what I saw, the one unifying argument against BGC is that it feels fake and soulless. Now, let me just clarify before we dive into the cesspool that I hold no stake in this debate. I hate crowded urban areas, and it's my dream to become a goose farmer in a remote mountain ranch unreachable by the Microsoft Teams ringtone. But I must say, there's part of me that agrees. I just couldn't quite point it out clearly before, but yeah, BGC does feel like a theme park. And unfortunately, that theme is LinkedIn. And the only ride is 20 years of thinking if I've actually thrown out the best years of my life with a meaningless pursuit. But I do want to be fair. Perhaps I just find it soulless because I work there. And I think most employment is pretty soulless by default. So I escaped work. So I went on my legally mandated break time to touch grass and answer some questions. Is BGC actually soulless? Is Makati any better? Why do I continue to feel insecure despite all the love shown to me by the people around me? How can we make business districts better? Does BGC actually hate poor people? I don't know. So let's try to find out. To call something a fake, you need first to establish what it's trying to be. BGC calls itself the Bonifacio Global City. 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 City is used pretty loosely here, given that technically, cities are an administrative division of the Philippines' local government system. BGC itself is under the administration of Taguig City, although, as a side note, this is a whole another round of debate with claims by other neighboring cities and municipalities like Makati and Pateros, but that's a topic for another time. So, not really a great start for BGC beating the fake allegations. But hey, if Honda can call it a subcompact sedan a city, then fine, let's let this slide, let's allow BGC to call it the opposite. So what actually makes BGC feel fake? Well, let's take a walk around. BGC loosely follows the grid system used prominently in New York. It even has its own Fifth Avenue. Overall, it kinda feels like Singapore without the mass transit but all of the humidity. There's nothing inherently wrong with taking inspiration from other iconic places. But for me, where BGC falls short is that it's focused on the form rather than the function. Let's look at the details here. Right around the middle of BGC sits what I can only describe as the Shibuya crossing from Timu. It tries so hard to look like Shibuya, and yet only gives its users barely enough time to cross the street. It has European-style dedicated bus lanes, with BGC exclusive buses that appear once every half an hour if you're lucky. It has wide open sidewalks that are unbearable to walk on because there's barely enough shade. And look, they've even cut down what little cover they did have before. It has art that seems to exist only for the sake of existing. I do love whatever message the Andres Bonifacio statue has here. For context, Andres Bonifacio is one of the Philippines' national heroes, and here we have him on horseback charging towards the JP Morgan Chase building. Something commentary on American hegemony. It's these small details that made me appreciate the Makati CBD just a tiny smidge more. Don't get me wrong, the Makati CBD is also guilty of pretentiousness and gentrification, but at the very least, things do feel a bit more functional. Its sidewalks may be narrower, but they're at least usable in the Philippine climate with all the tree shade they've allowed to grow. Bus lanes may only exist on a single road, but That road is smack dab in the middle of the district and is used by real public bus franchises that arrive one after another, sometimes all together at once. Ayala Avenue used to be heavily based on New York's office-only zoning, but it has since evolved into a vibrant mixed-use community that adapted to the evolving needs of its workers and commuters. For all its faults, Makati now at least looks and feels pretty original and confident in establishing its own identity. Sure, there's some modern glass slab skyscrapers, but they stand alongside iconic Filipino adapted brutalist buildings popularized by national artist Leandro Locsin. It's confident enough to stop wearing a tacky fake Rolex and embrace the functional elegance of a cheap but genuine Casio. For all its imperfections, Makati CBD at least keeps it real and keeps it functional. Okay, so we've established why it feels fake. Can we also examine why it feels soulless? Theme parks are fake, but they mostly don't feel soulless. We've all heard it before being used to describe places, but we first gotta ask, how does a place get a soul in the first place? To answer that, I recall the lesson I've learned from great scholar Rory Charles Graham and his quote about the essence of humanity. I'm only human after all. I'm only human after all. So don't put the blame on me. The concept of a soul is an inherently human experience. At the core of being human is being alive. Alive to experience the world around you, alive to respond to the stimuli that affect you, alive to change and adapt as your needs change. BGC is not alone in this phenomenon of cities feeling a bit inorganic. Sejong City in South Korea, designed from its very inception to supersede Seoul, hasn't quite achieved its own identity yet, with many of its inhabitants still primarily commuting in from Seoul. Canberra, Australia's actual capital, if you believe that Australia exists, remains in shadow of Sydney and Melbourne. In a more extreme example, Ashgabat in Turkmenistan, despite all of its marble and splendor, still remains a bit of a ghost town. The common denominator that these places all have with BGC, they were all planned cities. There's nothing inherently wrong about planning community. In fact, I kind of wish a lot of places here in the Philippines actually incorporated some level of city planning. The problem occurs during planning is that when that planning comes from the top down and is rigid about what it wants a place to be and not what the place needs to be. Yes, we do have to acknowledge BGC is a luxury development. It's allowed to exist in that market niche, but you have to remember at the heart of its city lies its workers. Yes, some of these workplaces do pay well, but a bulk of these workers don't have cars and can't afford to live within its borders. These people need affordable food and affordable transportation. They're only human after all. With food, in an organic city environment, this need would have been naturally met and adapted to by street vendors in small food carts. Now, BGC officially does not allow these vendors within its walls. So you end up with places like butas, where vendors are hidden away. I get it. They probably just don't want to have the burden of regulation and the potential liability of incidents like food poisoning and contamination. But if we cross heads yet again, we can actually see that there's a pretty good middle ground to be had. Enter Makati's Jolly Jeeps. Jolly, as a reference to Philippine Foreign Affairs Minister Jollibee, and Jeeps because apparently these food stalls used to be jeepies and food is sold out of them like a food truck. Citation needed. These stalls demonstrate how organic city development can be embraced to solve problems instead of building taller walls to hide them. I've already ranted about BGC's buses, but I do want to talk about BGC mobility yet again. One common gripe brought up online is that BGC is notoriously difficult to commute to on public transport. So much so that people have actually actively chosen not to work for employers based in BGC, opting instead for Makati. Walking around, you could see why. Public transport apart from BGC bus is allowed only on the outskirts of BGC. Tough luck if your office is in the middle, like say most of them are. You could either walk and sweat for another 20 to 30 minutes, take a chance on spotting a rare BGC bus, book an expensive car from a ride-hailing app, Or as what most people do, put your life on the line on a motorcycle taxi. I do have to be careful here because I do acknowledge that this is not an easy problem to solve, and the BGC administration probably has had attempts at trying to solve this problem. But from what I can see here on the ground, it feels a bit more that more effort seems to be placed at hiding it rather than addressing it. Continuing on the topic of Seoul, I would have wanted to discuss the other aspects of BGC versus Makati culture, like their nightlife. But as someone who prefers quiet nights or discabs, I have zero qualifications to make a judgment call on which district has the better atmosphere overall. From what I've seen online though, partying in BGC gets expensive quick, and yet even so, a lot of the old party places have since closed down. Something, recession indicator. There is one thing I do appreciate about BGC's community, and it's their facilities for exercise and simply being active. Yes, it's a sponsored brand thing, but I can appreciate the open access basketball court here in the middle of the district. If you knew anything about the Philippines, it's basically a crime not to have one here. I also appreciate the BGC Greenway, especially in the mornings. It's a great place to get your steps in without fear of being flattened by a Toyota Fortuner driven by an Atenean. Perhaps we're thinking about this wrong. Perhaps BGC isn't completely soulless, but more of its soul is harder to connect with, especially if you're not part of the demographic it was built for. You could try and enjoy its wide variety of artisan or indie cafes and restaurants, but at the median wage here, getting a morning coffee could genuinely mean having to trim the budget later on for lunch. You're free to roam around High Street, BGC's main retail strip, but for the average worker who can't afford to shop there, it's nothing more than a covered walkway from the bus terminal to their office. At this point in this video, you're probably expecting me to write down my proposal or recommendations to fix the problems I pointed out. Unfortunately, I am nowhere near qualified to make any recommendation on city planning, traffic engineering, and landscape architecture. Besides, I'm sure someone's already down there in the comments typing up an actually response essay to this video essay. So I won't make any super specific recommendations that I'm sure the BGC boardroom has already heard and read multiple times before. The only thing I will say when discussing urban development is that I hope we focus less on trying to look the part and instead focus on making things actually functional. Not that we completely ignore aesthetics, but I do believe that we can turn it down a notch on trying to look like a Timu Singapore and instead focus on understanding why Singapore looks like that.